You know what they say, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. Or should you? After all, how far do you go before something is considered truly broken? Hello everyone, this is Venom Geek Media here, and well, you will see exactly what I am talking about in the title, and you can probably guess the nature of the video based on that little introduction. Yes, we are talking about the Miranda class and the question of its replacement in the post-Dominion War Starfleet. This is something that I really want to cover because there's some very interesting options out there, but also there's a very interesting conversation to be had regarding the Miranda in and of itself, its role in history, and really the kind of historical anomaly that the Miranda class really is. So, without further ado, let's get into it. So when I said, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, can go too far, I do actually have a bit of a sort of personal anecdote regarding that. For years, I had a flip phone. Like, I am talking well into the 2010s, I had a flip phone. Everyone else is going around with smartphones. I was going around with a flip phone. Went through all of university with a flip phone. And my attitude was, well, the thing works. It still takes calls. It sends texts. It basically works. Right? Well, yeah, except there were a couple times where I'd travel up, get on the train and go to all that bother. I'd travel up there and, oh yeah, the lecture's been cancelled. Well, there was an email. Well, I've got a flip phone. That wasn't going to work for me, was it? You know, things like that where it's very much like, okay, yeah, technically it wasn't broken, but was it fully working for me either? No. The other thing to mention is, of course, with regards to replacing, I didn't replace it with a flashier flip phone, although many of us probably do wish that we could replace our phones with simpler flip phones. After all, things were simpler back then. Also, we like to think. But no, we do not replace our flip phones with flashier flip phones. I mean, we did for a bit, but eventually something completely new came along with the advent of the modern smartphone. And I'm sure in a few decades, or possibly less, who knows these days, something else will come along and that will completely replace it again. That's how technology works. Things don't just become flashier and flashier versions of the original model. There are paradigm shifts which ultimately change what is required, and thus the form of the very item. You know, a phone is a phone, but it's not a phone, is it? I mean, you know, look at the first phones and look at a modern phone. They're nothing alike. There's absolutely nothing alike. The concept has moved so far, both, you know, they look nothing alike. They do the same thing, or at least one of the same things. So in essential purpose, they do the same things, but the way they go about it, the form by which they are built, that has drastically changed. And that's a key point about technological development, is things can do the same things, often more than just the same things, but they can end up looking very different as well. And I think this particular principle should very much be applied to starship design. Now, on that very note, I'm going to say right out of the gate that I am not going to be considering for the replacement of the Miranda class, the Reliant class, because it's just an STO reskin of the Miranda. That's just not interesting, for one. Technology has advanced significantly in this time period. If they were going to do a Reliant, they would have done it already. They would have done it in the 24th century. Yes, I see you, Shikar. I acknowledge your existence, but we'll get to you another time. And the other thing to mention is that when it comes to replacing the Miranda, you've also got to be asking, well, what Miranda are you replacing? Are you replacing the Miranda of the Dominion War, or are you replacing the original Miranda of the 23rd century? The Miranda of the 24th century and the Miranda of the 23rd century are not the same thing. In the 23rd century, the Miranda is a modular light cruiser. Light or medium cruiser. You could call it a battle cruiser. I think that's a little bit disingenuous given that the Constitution itself is termed a heavy cruiser. Sometimes the Klingons call it a battle cruiser. So Constitution is in contention, but not quite the Miranda, I don't think. And the key thing about the Miranda as this cruiser platform is that it is modular. So we have multiple different variants. We have the Avenger, the quote-unquote stock Miranda. It's the one with the mega phasers and the torpedo pod. That's the Avenger variant. In many ways actually overguns the Constitution. Then you have the Soyuz variant, which is a communications variant. It's able to boost communications. It has lots of comms antenna on there, so it's very good for boosting long-range communications, which is a very important part of fleet operations in the 23rd century. Then we have the Antares variant. That is basically a ECM variant. It is designed to provide ECM cover for a Federation fleet. And then finally you have the Saratoga variant. That has 2 sensor pods on either side, and they are specifically for long-range target identification. So you can see and identify ships from a very, very, very long way off. So what we have then in the 23rd century is a cruiser platform that is capable of self-defense and also all aspects of ISR, intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance. And its modularity is the key to this. In the 23rd century, it's very possible that you can have a Miranda battle group. Only half might actually be the Avenger variants, and the rest are all these other ISR variants. And this gives the Miranda an important place in the fleet of the 23rd century. But by the time we get to the 24th century, this has really changed quite a bit. Because the problem with modular systems like this is that eventually they become outmoded and incompatible. You simply can't go plonking the same modules you'd put on a Nebula class on a Miranda class, for fairly obvious reasons. So there's a limitation in terms of future-proofing, in terms of modularity, because ships will change significantly in their form and what kind of modules they could accommodate. By the 24th century, most of these modular systems are outmoded by your standard modern integrated systems. You could invest in upgrading these systems to be more powerful, but why? You've got, in a Galaxy class, you'll have sensors that are just as powerful, if not more powerful, than the Saratoga. You'll have ECM suites more powerful than those on the Antares, and you'll have better communications infrastructure than you ever did with the Soyuz, and you've got more firepower than you ever did with an Avenger. Extreme example, but it just goes to show that, by the 24th century, these specialist capabilities are just not important, much like how having a mobile phone and an iPod, a BlackBerry, of course, yes, if you were very businessy, you'd have a BlackBerry in the 2000s. So, you'd be wielding, you need 3 arms to wield your electronic devices, and now you just need 1. And so what we see in the 24th century, if you actually look, everyone thinks that the Miranda continually served into the 24th century. And I think that's because they're sort of looking retroactively and they're doing a bit of retconning in their head. I think actually by the 24th century, most Miranda-class ships are retired into mothballs and are in reserve. Most of the Mirandas that we see during Next Generation are non-combat variants. Things like the Bozeman, obviously that's time-travelled, but things like the Lantry, that's a pure cargo ship. I think we do also see an actual Avenger variant as well, but again, that's fairly lightly crewed and just doing sort of odd science jobs. But it very much seems that the Miranda class overall is on its way to the reserves, or is already in the reserves. And we only start to see the Miranda employed in more of a military setting by the time of the Dominion War. Actually, a little bit before that. There is one that appears at the end of The Way of the Warrior. So perhaps that was reactivated, perhaps that was one of the last stragglers. But certainly, I don't think we have evidence to suggest that the Miranda is particularly ubiquitous as a frontline ship. As a second-line reserve ship, yes. But is it serving in the front lines? By no means, because you have all these other ships at the time, and Starfleet isn't yet at war. But then, of course, yes, we have the Dominion War, and we will see large numbers of Mirandas brought out of mothballs to fight in the war. Now, this points to something I've mentioned. I may have mentioned it before, but I think it's pretty key, and that is that at the outbreak of war, And in the run-up to the Dominion War, Starfleet suffers from a destroyer gap. So you think about the forces of the Dominion, so the Cardassians and the Jem'Hadar. So obviously you have hordes of Jem'Hadar fighters. That's basically their entire fleet is just Jem'Hadar fighters, some cruisers sprinkled in. The Cardassian fleet mostly made up of medium cruisers, but with quite a lot in the range of frigates and destroyers. So yes, you have the Hideki, but we also have things like the Lakat, the Raisalak, and the Kulinor. So that's, 4 small ships in use by the Cardassians. And there isn't really a Starfleet equivalent to it other than the Sabre class. This is why we'll then see the Miranda brought out of mothballs, among other ships as well, like the Akiasi. And so basically the Miranda is brought out of mothballs because Starfleet is critically short of large numbers of small ships, which it needs to counter the overwhelming numbers of attack ships and destroyers that the Dominion and Cardassians are using. So it's not because the Miranda is particularly useful, it's because they don't have anything else. They literally have the Sabre, handfuls of Defiants, really not that many Defiants, because they're so expensive, and that's it. So they bring out the Miranda to plug that gap. Now, I recall that the Chieftain said that his favourite starship was the Miranda class, and the reason he gave, and I hate to burst your bubble, Nick, but the reason he gave was because he viewed it as the Sherman of Starfleet. Yeah, it's not the Sherman of Starfleet. If anything, something like the Sabre is the Sherman of Starfleet. Somewhat advanced, but it's also relatively mass-producible. The Miranda in the Dominion War is the equivalent of, in the current Ukraine war, Russia reactivating old T-62s, T-54s, that kind of thing. That's the kind of thing that's really going on there, is that you're completely desperate. You have this old thing. Is it highly competitive? No. Will it do the job? Yeah. You reactivate them. Now, people will argue and say, oh, well, of course, the Miranda, when it was brought out of mothballs, they were upgraded. Okay. That is highly dependent on how much time and resources you have available. Because, of course, all the resources you're diverting to upgrade Mirandas, and, it's going to have to be a pretty substantial process. It's not going to be a plug-and-play situation. This is a big deal to take a Miranda from 23rd century to 24th century standards. It's a big jump. It's even more of a jump than it would have been with the Lakota, and I think that was a big jump. Do you have time to do that when you need these ships yesterday? And not to mention, in so doing, you're going to be taking resources away from building actually new, modern, up-to-date competitive ships like the Sabre and Defiant. Mirandas may have had an upgrade earlier in the 24th century, but I find it very doubtful that come the Dominion War, they would have even had the chance to upgrade them. Maybe some in-field stuff, again, much like we see in the modern Ukraine conflict, but I don't see a wholesale modernization process taking place because Starfleet just doesn't have the time. And so, why am I being so mean to the Miranda? Why am I beating down on it so hard? Well, because I think there's an important question to ask here, and that is, does the Miranda actually serve in a role where it needs replacing? And I think the answer, if we take the 24th century version of the Miranda, the only answer is yes, if you're fighting in a demolition derby. In any other scenario, there are better options, and you're not just looking at replacing the Miranda. You're looking at developing other new modern capabilities. The Miranda in the Dominion War, it wasn't a good ship. I'm really sorry. It did its job absolutely admirably. But was it a good ship? No. Not for the Dominion War. Then we ask the question, well, okay, what about replacing the Miranda of the 23rd century? Sure, absolutely. That is worth replacing. Thing is that there are plenty of things out there that actually do already do that. Things like the Shikar from the Next Generation era, or indeed, if you want something more modern, completely cutting edge, the Luna class. That's dealt with. We've replaced the Miranda in the form of a modular cruiser. So we're now looking at, okay, how would we replace it as a mainline destroyer in the Dominion War? So what are really the requirements? Well, the requirements are pretty simple, really. You're looking for a ship that is between 150 and 250 meters long and is capable of serving as a multi-mission destroyer. Well, we already have that. It's called the Sabre class. Despite its smaller overall length at 180 meters, the Sabre has a similar volume to the Miranda class. It has, internally, actually, it's very likely that it has a very similar layout. Both of them probably have horizontally oriented warp cores due to their low profile. The only issue during the Dominion War was that there just weren't enough Sabres. They couldn't produce the damn things fast enough. So is there really a need to replace the Miranda when it seems like we've already got replacements? Now there's other questions such as, has modularity evolved? Is the Sabre just as modular as the Miranda, or is that perhaps a blind spot in the design of the Sabre? Or the other question is, actually, is modularity really the way to go in the post-war era, or is specialization a better thing to do, especially given the size of Starfleet in the post-Dominion War era? The Starfleet in that post-war period is a lot bigger, so can afford to field more specialist designs. So, okay, what about variants? What about things to do other than the generic multi-role destroyer missions? Well, we already have a couple things. We have the Nova class as your science ship. We have the Diligent class that does whatever it does. And we have the Hayden, but I think I'll save the Hayden for another video. So, to wrap things up here, should Starfleet replace the Miranda? Yes, and it has, with bigger ships like the Shikar and Luna. On the other side, no it shouldn't, because its Dominion War use, as I say, that is purely as a stock car in a demolition derby. If Starfleet starts printing out ships like the Reliant class, be very, very, very worried. Because that's a sign that many things and many years of force design and doctrine have gone completely wrong if they're back at the point of printing out these disposable destroyers again. The Miranda really wasn't meant to be there, and I don't think it should stay in a post-war Starfleet. I don't think it has a place in a post-war Starfleet. In its day, yeah, the Miranda was great, but this is not that day, not by a long shot. But I think, critically, Starfleet should make a lesson of the Miranda and why it had to be used in the Dominion War. That is to avoid ending up with a top-heavy fleet and to avoid the development of any kind of destroyer gaps in the future, to not neglect its escort forces going into the future. I think that's the most important lesson of the Miranda class. And that is something that I will cover in my upcoming video on Starfleet fleet doctrine in the post-war world. But until then, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and I will see you all in the next video. Thank you to my members for supporting the channel. My glorious Navarks, Tully DT, Rella, Sean Farrell, and Zaylan Maru. My ever-dutiful commanders, Philip Ty, Birdmonster, Jeff Hallam, Mark Philippe, Robert Kahn Strider, David Reeves, Gabe Logan, Adam Bowman, Nicholas Walsh, Martin McConville, JC Tech Wizard, Alcara Dreamer, Gloom Cookie, Der Monarch, Jamal Soto, and Tin Alt. And I salute my Centurions, Pendlebury, Marcus Hall, Julian Arnott, Freedom Trooper, Okokatum Questo, John Nicole, Athys Collection, Tobias Klein, Marzarine, Bird of Play D3, Khan the Skektal Overlord, David Jackson, Andy Clark, Quentin King, Shipmaster, Valletta Petra Siren, Japhany Hughes, and Ian Hands. And I thank all my loyal sub-lieutenants, and I welcome Grant Mills, Sam Ard, Benton Reviews, Cadin Dark Lord, and Canal Lane. Thank you all for supporting the channel, and I will see you all in the next video.